All right, welcome everyone to our deep dive where we try to make sense of what's happening in the markets and why it matters to you. And today, we've got a really interesting mix of sources. We've got, let's see, financial news from MarketWatch and CNBC, of course. We've also got some personal finance advice from the Motley Fool UK. And then, just to spice things up, we've got some legal and investing news from investing.com and Seeking Alpha.
Yeah. Always good to have a broad perspective, right?
Exactly. So let's just dive right in. I think the big elephant in the room, or at least the one everyone's talking about, is this market correction that seems to be happening.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's interesting because you've got someone like U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and, MarketWatch reported that he's actually downplaying the worries. Like, he's pretty chill about it. He even called corrections, quote, healthy, end quote, which, that's one way to look at it.
Yeah, I guess it depends on your perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because on the other hand, you have CNBC's Mike Santoli, and he's urging investors to be a little more cautious. He suggests that maybe, just maybe, this correction could be a sign of some bigger problems brewing.
Okay, so like what kind of problems are we talking about here?
Well, some analysts are pointing fingers at President Trump's policies, saying those might be playing a role.
Okay, yeah.
The trade negotiations, the tariffs, all that stuff creates uncertainty in the global market.
Right.
And then there's always that looming fear of a recession, which, let's be honest, always makes investors a little jittery.
Yeah, nobody likes a recession.
Yep.
So what can we, the average investors, do to kind of navigate this whole roller coaster?
Well, CNBC has some advice for that. They're suggesting that maybe now is a good time to consider, less risky investment strategies.
Okay, I like that. Play it safe.
Exactly. So they specifically mention things like buffer funds, which are designed to protect your portfolio from big downturns.
So like a cushion.
Yeah, exactly. A cushion. And then there are also covered call funds, which can actually generate income through, options premiums. These are a bit more complex.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But they offer a way to potentially reduce risk in a market that's, going up and down like crazy.
Got it. So speaking of risk, MarketWatch had this really interesting report about consumer sentiment.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's apparently at a 29-month low.
People are not feeling good.
Not feeling good at all. But here's the thing that I found fascinating. While consumers are stressing about inflation, about the economy, MarketWatch noticed that company executives seem to be laser focused on something else entirely.
Yeah, it's like they're living in a different world sometimes.
Right. And that something else is artificial intelligence. AI.
AI. It's everywhere these days.
It really is. So it's like this disconnect, right?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if maybe their priorities are a little out of sync with what everyday people are worried about.
Right. Maybe. But hey, since everyone is talking about AI, let's talk about it too.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
It's like AI is having its big moment,
Yeah.
We see it everywhere, from China's Baidu launching its new AI models to even discussions about the U.S. maybe falling behind China in nuclear fusion development. And part of that is driven by AI's increasing energy needs.
Wait, so AI needs that much energy?
Oh, yeah.
So are we talking like a new arms race here? But instead of nukes, it's algorithms.
I mean, maybe not that dramatic, but you're not wrong to point out the comparison. It shows just how important AI is becoming and the power it has. And, all this AI development, it brings up some important questions about how it's going to affect everyday people like us.
Absolutely.
Like, how is it going to change the job market? What kind of cool new tech can we expect to see? And maybe the most important question, are there ethical concerns we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, it's a whole new world. And it's easy to get caught up in the hype.
Oh, for sure.
Remember when Apple promised us Siri would be this amazing, super intelligent assistant?
Yeah, what happened there?
Well, MarketWatch reminds us that not all AI hype actually lives up to the reality.
That's a good point. I think it's important to be a little skeptical.
Yeah.
Some AI stuff is truly amazing, but other things might just be old technology with a fancy new name.
A marketing spin, so maybe don't throw away your old notepad just yet.
Good advice.
All right, before we go completely down the AI rabbit hole, let's take a step back and look at some other trends that are popping up in our sources.
Sounds good.
And CNBC, they found this really interesting thing. Apparently, Gen Z is obsessed with retro tech.
Like what?
We're talking Polaroids, vinyl records, even flip phones.
Whoa, a blast from the past.
Right. So what do you think is driving this nostalgia wave? Is it some kind of rejection of the digital world?
It's interesting. Maybe they're just looking for something a little more tangible, a little more real. Or maybe it's a way to express their own unique style in a world that's so digital.
It's like they're saying, we've hit peak digital.
Yeah.
Time to rewind. And actually, this raises a question for you, our listener. How do you feel about this retro trend? Is it something you're into? Are you all about the latest gadgets? Let us know.
Yeah, chime in.
But speaking of things that need a bit of a rewind, CNBC also reported that more and more Americans with college degrees are actually working multiple jobs.
Yeah, that's a tough situation.
You'd think a degree would be the ticket to a stable career, right?
I think so.
But apparently that's not always the case anymore.
It seems like a lot of factors are at play. Wages haven't really kept up with the cost of living, and the gig economy is becoming more and more prevalent.
It's a good reminder that the job market is changing, and we need to be ready to adapt, even with a degree.
Absolutely.
And speaking of adapting, CNBC also noticed what they called a vibe shift around layoffs. It's not just about the job losses themselves, it's about how those layoffs are handled.
Yeah, people are looking for more transparency, more empathy from their employers.
It's like that trust between employers and employees is starting to break down.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the market, the rise of AI, and some interesting trends in society. Now I think it's time to address the elephant in the room, which is, of course, President Trump and how he's impacting, well, everything.
Always a hot topic.
CNBC reported that his stance on climate change is causing a new kind of range anxiety, not for electric car drivers, but for the companies that make those charging stations.
Oh, I see.
His administration is trying to cut funding for electric vehicles, which is putting a damper on the industry's growth.
It's a tough situation because, some people believe the government should be supporting these new technologies, while others think it should be left to private companies.
Yeah, it's a tough balance. And speaking of balance, his tariff negotiations with Canada, well, they haven't exactly gone smoothly.
No, not at all.
CNBC highlighted how those tariffs have really angered Canadian consumers and politicians.
Yeah, it's put a strain on the relationship between the two countries.
And it seems like his America First policies are having a ripple effect far beyond just the U.S.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out in the long run.
Definitely. So there you have it. That's part one of our deep dive. We've covered market corrections, the rise of AI, some interesting societal trends, and a little bit of politics.
And in part two, we're going to delve even deeper into these trends and explore what they mean for you, the listener. So stay tuned. It's amazing how all these things we talked about in the last part, like the market and AI, they're all kind of connected. It's a crazy world out there.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of crazy, there's this weird thing happening with Warren Buffett that has everyone scratching their heads.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, CNBC is reporting that Berkshire Hathaway, Buffett's company, might be selling its real estate business.
Yeah.
Which seems kind of strange coming from him, right?
Yeah, he's like Mr. Real Estate.
Exactly. So some people are thinking, does this mean he's not so optimistic about real estate anymore? Like maybe he sees a downturn coming.
Yeah, it definitely makes you wonder what he knows that we don't.
Right. And then there's this other story from CNBC that really caught my eye. It was about how the U.S. is actually falling behind China when it comes to nuclear fusion. And get this, part of the reason is because of AI and how much energy it needs.
Wow, so AI is even impacting things like nuclear fusion now.
Apparently so. It makes sense though, right? I mean, AI needs a ton of power to run all those algorithms and do all those amazing things.
Yeah, it's not just about who's got the coolest tech anymore. It's also about who's got the energy to power it.
Exactly. It's a whole new kind of competition. But speaking of competition, let's not forget about our personal finances, right? That's why we love the Motley Fool UK. They always have great advice on how to navigate the market, how to build some passive income, plan for retirement.
Yeah, their stuff is super practical.
Oh, totally. And I was reading this one article. They were talking about how someone who's 40 years old could start investing just £100 a week and potentially retire early. I mean, come on, who doesn't want to retire early?
Sign me up.
Right. And the Motley Fool UK, they lay it all out. They talk about the power of compound interest, how important it is to invest consistently over time. It's not about getting rich quickly. It's about building wealth slowly and steadily.
That's the key. Patience.
Yep. They also talk about using things like IPSAs, those tax-efficient investment accounts they have in the UK.
Right. Smart ways to grow your money without giving too much back to the tax man.
Exactly. There was another article that really caught my eye. It was about how to generate like £2,500 a month in passive income just from dividends. Can you imagine that?
That would be pretty sweet.
Right. Just having that extra cash flow coming in every month doing absolutely nothing.
Living the dream.
So the Motley Fool UK, they break it all down. They talk about choosing the right dividend stocks, looking for companies that have a history of paying out consistently.
Yeah, you don't want to pick a company that's going to suddenly stop paying dividends.
Nope. And they emphasize the importance of diversification, not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Avoid spreading the risk. Smart move.
Oh, and before I forget, there was one more article from the Motley Fool UK that was really interesting. It was this hypothetical scenario. What if Tesla stock was valued like NVIDIA, the chip company?
Oh, that's a fun one.
Right, because you've got NVIDIA, this huge player in the semiconductor industry, and then you've got Tesla, which is kind of like a tech company and a car company all rolled into one.
Yeah, it's hard to compare them directly.
Exactly. But the article dives into all the different factors that influence a company's stock price. It's a good reminder that the market doesn't always get it right. You have to do your own research.
Always a good idea. Speaking of research, remember all those little legal and investing tidbits we saw from investing.com and Seeking Alpha?
Oh, yeah, all those headlines about lawsuits and mergers and the White House looking into TikTok. It's like a whole other world.
It's a reminder that the world of business and finance, it's not just about numbers and charts. There's a whole legal and regulatory side to it, and it can get pretty intense.
Yeah, definitely. It's like a high-stakes chess game. But before we get too serious, I wanted to mention this important announcement from CNBC. They're warning people about scams related to those $1,400 IRS stimulus payments. Apparently, there are some shady characters out there trying to trick people into giving up their personal information.
That's awful. People are always trying to take advantage of others, especially when times are tough.
It's a good reminder to be careful out there, especially when you're dealing with anything financial. Always double-check those offers and never give out your information unless you're absolutely sure it's legit.
Solid advice.
Okay, and for a little bit of fun before we move on, CNBC had all the details on March Madness for all you sports fans out there. Selection Sunday is coming up, so get ready for some basketball action.
All right. Gotta love March Madness.
So in this part of our deep dive, we've talked about Warren Buffett's big move, the race for nuclear fusion, and some great investment advice from the Motley Fool UK. We've also touched on the importance of being aware of scams, and of course, we had to give a shout out to March Madness.
We're covering all the bases here.
You got it. And in the final part, we'll wrap it all up and leave you with some food for thought. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive. It's been a whirlwind, hasn't it? We've talked about everything from those market hiccups to the AI explosion and from like what people are buying to how President Trump is shaking things up.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But before we wrap things up completely, I want to circle back to those interesting legal and investing stories we got from investing.com and Seeking Alpha. All those headlines about class action lawsuits and companies merging and even the White House taking a closer look at that TikTok deal.
Right. It's easy to forget that business and finance aren't just about, stocks going up and down. There's a whole legal side to it, a whole regulatory landscape that could be just as impactful.
Oh, for sure. It's like one wrong move and boom, you're in court or facing a huge fine. So with all this stuff happening, what are the key takeaways, the things our listeners should really remember?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be adaptable. The world's changing so fast, and if you can't keep up, you're going to get left behind. It's about, constantly learning, constantly adjusting your strategies, whether that's in your investments or your career or even just in your everyday life.
So it's not just about knowing what's happening. It's about understanding why it matters to you.
Exactly. Hopefully this deep dive has given you some of the tools you need to make smart decisions and, stay ahead of the game.
And speaking of staying ahead of the game, remember how CNBC was talking about China making big moves in AI and nuclear fusion? It kind of makes you wonder, right, about where the U.S. stands in this whole global tech race. Are we falling behind?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer has implications not just for our economy, but for our national security and even for, the balance of power in the world. It's a big deal.
It is a big deal. So as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. How are you going to position yourself in this crazy, ever-changing world? Are you going to sit back and watch it all happen, or are you going to be part of shaping the future?
The choice is yours.
It really is. Well, it's been great exploring all these trends with you, and remember, even though our deep dive ends here, the conversation doesn't have to. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay engaged.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the trends shaping our world. Until then, stay curious.